He filmed these girls and then kept their bones as a trophy. Stomu Miyazaki was born in 1962 in Japan. At birth, he carried a physical deformity affecting his hands and wrists. Because of this, kids at his school would make fun of him, and he would often spend time by himself because of it. Once Stomu made it to high school, he pursued photography, and it was something that he really enjoyed. Once he was an adult in 1988, it seemed like something snapped in him. Stomu had this fantasy to abduct little girls because they were small, trusting, and could be easily persuaded. In August of 1988, Stomu found his first victim, 4-year-old Mary Kono. He lured her into his car with the promise of a ride or photographs, and he ended up driving her to a wooded area where he ended her life. Months later, he sent her family a package, and that package contained some of that little girl's remains. But Stomu didn't stop there. He did this to 3 more girls. He would essay their corpse and either remove their hands, feet, or even teeth and keep them as a trophy. In July of 1989, Stomu approached 2 girls in a park. He was able to separate the youngest from the oldest, and he told the youngest girl to remove her clothes so that he could take photographs of her. Her father noticed and intervened, and Stomu immediately took off. As he fled running to return to his car, police arrested him. Once police searched his home, they found 5,763 tapes, photographs, preserved remains, and items that belonged to those missing girls. In 1990, trial began for Stomu, and he tried to blame it all on his supposed alter ego, Ratman. Ultimately, the court determined that he understood his actions, and he was sentenced to death in 1997. In 2008, Stomu was finally executed.
What would you do if you saw a man wandering around eating a severed human leg? It was the 22nd of March 2024 in Kern County, California. At roughly 8 a.m. that day, a member of the public was tragically hit by an oncoming train. This was at the Amtrak train station in Wasco. The incident itself was obviously shocking enough, with a pedestrian losing their life after being hit by the train. However, things would then take an even darker turn than anyone could imagine. The force of the train hitting the individual is said to have been so severe that it severed their leg. A 27-year-old man named Rosendo Tellez then allegedly removed the leg from the scene. Eyewitnesses reported seeing him wandering around the local area after the incident, carrying the leg. Witnesses saw him carrying the severed leg around, biting it and shockingly eating it. A horrific video of the incident has been circulating on social media. Thankfully, the man was tracked down and was arrested on charges of removal of human remains from other than a cemetery. He was also charged with violating his probation. He is scheduled to be appearing in court very soon.
He ate his girlfriend for dinner and then wrote poetry about the situation. 40-year-old Jose Luis Galva Cepeda was from Mexico City, and on the surface he seemed quiet, intelligent, and artistic. He wrote poetry, spoke about love, and he desperately wanted to be recognized as a serious writer, but behind closed doors, something darker was happening. Jose Luis grew up in extreme poverty, and for many years he dealt with physical and emotional abuse as a child. Later on, he would struggle with addiction, unstable relationships, and untreated mental illness. Despite everything, he wanted to become a famous poet and talk about love, pain, and suffering, though he never got the recognition that he thought he would. Friends would describe Jose Luis as possessive, obsessive, and deeply insecure, especially with romantic relationships. In 2007, Jose Luis started a toxic relationship with a woman named Alejandra. This relationship was marked by jealousy and control, and when she tried to leave him, that's when everything spiraled. The couple had an argument inside of his apartment, and Jose Luis ended her life. But instead of him calling police or fleeing the scene, he stayed at his apartment, dismembered her body, and over the next several days, he cooked and consumed her. During this time, he continued writing his poetry, and he even wrote some pieces about the murder, claiming that it was love, loss, and transformation. Once Alejandra's family had reported her as missing, police traced her last known location to Jose Luis's apartment. Once they went inside, they found human remains in containers, cookware, and even blood all over the apartment. When Jose Luis was being arrested, he did not resist. He seemed very calm and almost like he was proud of himself. He claimed that he did this out of love and curiosity, and she would always be a part of him. In 2007, before sentencing could be finalized, Jose Luis was found dead in his cell.
Imagine glancing at your neighbour's porch and slowly realising the person lying there hasn't moved. It was late summer 2024 in Billings Heights. The area is generally very chill, quiet and residential, not somewhere that you would expect to find a gruesome murder scene. Jenna Ray Lacombe was 52 and living in the area. She was an amazing woman, extremely selfless. She was always putting others before herself, especially her sons Nathan and Joseph. Now, she saw them as her little babies, even when they grew up to be taller than her. She loved doing arts and crafts and general kind of chill activities, and she was a huge fan of the Dallas Cowboys thanks to her brother. She'd actually been living with a guy called Shane Roberts. The pair had met on a dating site about 2 years prior and had eventually moved in together. But weirdly, that particular month, her neighbours stopped seeing her around. They were like, this is so weird. She's usually very friendly. She comes out, she waves, she says hi. So why haven't we seen her in so long? Like, where is she? She wasn't the kind of person to just lock herself away. And as the days and days went on, the neighbours were just getting more and more concerned. Then people next door started to be like, there's actually a strange smell coming from the property. And the way Shane, the boyfriend, had been acting was really sketchy. Couldn't really put their finger on it, but he was just acting a bit suspicious. And there was a pile of blankets on the porch, almost shaped like a body. So they decided to ring police. They were like, do you know what? We really hope we've got the wrong end of the stick here. We hope the police will just come round, tell us what's going on, and put our minds at rest. But when officers peeled back the blankets on the porch, they found Jenna. She'd been almost decapitated and left to rot on the porch. Absolutely barbaric, inhumane, and sickening. I have no other words. And police obviously needed to find out who was responsible. It was incredibly dangerous for these officers to try and go inside the home. They knew there could very well be a cold-blooded killer inside the property. So they drew their weapons, they secured the scene, and they stepped inside. They went from room to room, systematically looking around for the culprit. And the apartment seemed empty until they heard a dog barking. They followed the noise and realized the noise was coming from inside of a wardrobe. Inside, they found Shane cowering with a little dog. They immediately arrested him. They knew it was pretty likely that he was to blame here. And they found a rubbish bag inside the property with a bloody hatchet and a knife. And get this, Shane tried to defend himself to officers by saying Jenna knew how to push his buttons and had pushed him too far. The judge called it one of the most gruesome and violent murders she had ever seen. After he pleaded guilty, he was given 85 years in prison.
He poured cement down her throat so no one would hear her scream. 7-year-old Heaven Awa was left in the care of a trusted family friend while her mother was at work. Now, this is when the landlord, Getnet Bey, decided to make his move. Getnet brutally SA'd Heaven. He poured a mixture of sand, pebbles, and water into her mouth and down her throat so no one would hear her scream. This mixture acts just like cement. Heaven was SA'd so brutally that her insides were torn up, her uterus was not visible anymore, and her spine was cracked and sticking out of her skin. Getnet then unalived Heaven by strangling her. He washed the blood off of her body, bathed her in bleach to get rid of any DNA evidence, put her clothes back on, and threw her body outside to make it look like she had fallen off the building. As if unaliving Heaven wasn't enough for him, he took a razor and made cuts all over her body to make the fall seem more believable. When Heaven's mom saw Heaven, she knew that her daughter had been unalived. Getnet had many connections within the police force and with the authorities, so no one helped Heaven's mom. Getnet even sent people out to unalive Heaven's mom if she even reached out to authorities. At first, Getnet was sentenced to 3 days in prison, but because of public outrage, he was sentenced to another 25 years. Because of Getnet's connection, he's likely to get parole or even get the case appealed. Now, Getnet's reasoning for unaliving Heaven was because he asked Heaven's mother to go on a date with him and she said no. While researching this case, I literally could not stop crying because this case is so devastating. What do you guys think of this case?
How does somebody vanish, then reappear 42 years later alive? And the most agonizing part of all is that she can't even tell us what happened. It was August 1975 in New York, and Flora Stevens was a very normal 36-year-old woman. She lived with her husband, and on the day in question, she literally just had a doctor's appointment. She was going to go to this appointment in Monticello. It wasn't going to take her long, and then she'd be straight back home. So her husband went and dropped her off and said, "See you later," having no no idea he would never see her again. He started to get pretty worried when time was just ticking on, and he was glancing at the clock and she just wasn't home. It was like, where the hell could she be? Now, she worked at a Catskills resort, which I guess is like a holiday destination in the mountains, but her colleagues hadn't heard from her either. She wasn't there. Police tried and honestly just kept coming to a load of dead ends. They couldn't seem to find any trace of this woman anywhere. Time ticked on and her husband never lost hope of finding her, but eventually police had to just chalk it up to being a cold case. That was until 2017 when police got a call about some human remains. An investigator was like, I found these skeletal remains and it kind of matches the description of Flora Stevens, that missing woman from all those years ago. He was like, can we run a search, test the DNA, and just make sure once and for all whether this is actually her? You know, if we can match a DNA sample somewhere, then maybe we can actually get some closure in this case. But something very bizarre happened when they ran a search. They were like, in this system, it's flagging that somebody is using Flora Stevens' social security number over in Massachusetts. So they obviously were thinking, okay, maybe we've uncovered a fraud case here. So imagine their surprise when they showed up at the address in Massachusetts to bust this criminal and found Flora Stevens alive in a nursing home. They could not believe their eyes. Now, they approached Flora and actually showed her her old ID photo from all of those years ago, and she said, yep, that's me. But I am so torn on whether this is even a happy ending or not. I don't know what you think, because Flora actually by that point had been diagnosed with dementia. And if, like me, you've had relatives with that disease, you know just how devastating it is. It really stops them being able to tell you much a lot of the time. And Flora sadly couldn't shed any light on what had happened to her all those years ago. Our detectives looked through her medical records to try and get a clue. It showed that she'd lived in care homes in New Hampshire and New York City, but it didn't really reveal anything about her disappearance. Tragically, by the time that she was found, she also had no living relatives. Her husband had passed away in 1985, having never found out what happened to Flora. It's probably the saddest happy ending I've ever heard.
She sat on the couch while her children were opening their Christmas gifts, but she wasn't alive. In 2011, Giselle Preston was living in Anaheim, California with her husband William, their newborn son, and her two daughters who were from a previous relationship, and they were ages 3 and 8. At 26 years old, Giselle started to take a college course in hopes of becoming a domestic violence counselor. She wanted to provide guidance to people suffering in violent and abusive relationships. She felt a calling to this job because she was in a violent and abusive marriage herself. Her husband, 30-year-old William Wallace, had beat her on previous occasions and was even spending time in jail because of it. Despite this, Giselle loved her husband very much and didn't want their marriage to end. She even had a profile picture on Facebook of the two kissing, and it said, "Lovebirds for life." On Christmas Eve of 2011, William had already been released from prison, so the two went to a neighbor's house for a party. Once they arrived back to the apartment, neighbors could hear them in a heated argument. When the neighbor looked out the window, they saw William carrying what appeared to be a human body near the front gate. The neighbor wasn't too concerned. They thought maybe William was just helping a drunk individual go back to their home. Once William was inside of the apartment, the argument continued and Giselle tried to leave the apartment, but then he dragged her back inside. The argument escalated and became physical, and William threw Giselle on top of a glass table, shattering it. Giselle's 8-year-old daughter tried to help William pick her mother up and take her to the bathroom so that she could pick out the glass shards from her body. At this point, Giselle suffered a concussion from a blow to the head. But sadly, this was just another day in the household. The children were used to seeing their mother get beaten by William, and William just assumed that she would be okay and she would forgive him and the cycle would continue. Little did William know that this time had gone too far. Later that evening, once the children went to bed, William realized that his wife Giselle had succumbed to her injuries. Next morning was going to be Christmas, and William wanted to come up with a plan so that his children could still enjoy Christmas. William's plan was to speak directly to their children, not to apologize for what they had witnessed, not to break the news that their mother had passed away, but to shift the blame onto Giselle and tell them that she had blacked out the night before and that mommy ruined Christmas because she was drunk. Next morning, William propped up Giselle's lifeless body on the couch and put sunglasses on her to make it seem like she was still alive. The lie that Giselle was blackout drunk made the illusion easier to sell to the children. At one point, Giselle's oldest daughter approached her and noticed that she felt cold. It was at this point that William realized he needed to put an end to this, so he reached out to emergency services at 9 a.m. William told the operator that his wife needed medical attention, and once paramedics arrived, they were confused when they saw Giselle sitting on the couch with sunglasses looking perfectly fine. Once they approached her, they realized that she was deceased, and William tried to shift the blame on Giselle, claiming that she had injured herself a while ago, but they weren't buying the story and they immediately called police. William was arrested and placed on a $1 million bond. As the investigation continued, police were searching the home and they saw blood spots everywhere, and there was even holes in the doors and walls. In court, William stated that they were drinking, had an argument, and he tossed her around a little bit. He claimed this was a normal part of marriage and he did nothing wrong. In June of 2021, nearly 10 years later, William was convicted of second-degree murder and was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison.
It's called the UK's version of the Making a Murderer case, and almost no one knows it exists. It was Valentine's Day 1988 in Cardiff in Wales. Lynette White was a young woman who'd had a really difficult start to life. She was only 20 and had been forced into a life of S-work to make ends meet. A gang of men basically trafficked her because they saw how vulnerable she was. She'd been abused when she was growing up, so she had really low self-esteem. And she ended up dating this guy who was just constantly taking substances. Any money that she made through the S-work, she was made to give to her boyfriend, who was kind of acting as her P. I can't say it on here, but it's a 50 Cent song. It was no life for her at all, bless her. She was even out there on the streets working on Christmas Day. But far from finding a happy ending, on the night in question, she was found murdered. This was an absolutely brutal murder too. She'd been stabbed over 50 times in a flat that was used for S-work. One of the officers said that her top looked like a colander because it had so many holes in from the knife. So immediately police started to panic, to be honest. They had this crazy, brutal murder and no suspects. So later that year, they essentially came up with 5 culprits and said, these are our guys. These were Tony Paris, Stephen Miller, the boyfriend, Yusuf Abdullahi, and Johnny and Ronnie Acti. And it was shocking how they'd collected some of their so-called evidence. Stephen Miller was interviewed 19 times in the space of 4 days. It went on for 13 hours. When he asked if he could have someone there to support him or a solicitor, he was told no. He was later found to have a mental age of just 11 years old. And he repeatedly said that he had nothing to do with this crime. In fact, he said this 307 times. He totally broke him down to just the point where he was exhausted, he was hungry, he was thirsty, essentially coerced him into giving a confession and implicating the other men too. Despite there being no forensic evidence at all, and I mean none, linking the 5 men to the murder, they were put on trial. It was actually the longest murder trial in British history, lasting nearly 200 days. Finally, at the end of 1990, the Actis were acquitted, but the other 3 men were found guilty. But there was a public outcry. It was very similar to the Stephen Avery case over in America. Rumours were swirling around that these convictions were basically a load of crap, and a bunch of TV stations got on board with this. They started showing documentaries about these miscarriages of justice, very similar to how Stephen Avery got support from Netflix. These guys got support from BBC Panorama. The police interviews were said to have been oppressive and intimidating. Eventually, all 3 men had their convictions declared unsafe and they were released. Yusuf said, "Until it happens to you, no one can have any idea what it's like to be convicted for a murder you didn't commit. We've been really messed up by what we've been through. We needed counselling, but no one offered us any help." So what about Lynette? She'd been murdered, and because of some police incompetence, she still didn't have any justice. Well, the case was reopened eventually in 2000, and thanks to newer DNA technology, Jeffrey Gaffor was highlighted as a suspect. And it was very dramatic when Jeffrey got wind that he was a suspect. He tried to unalive himself, but in these dramatic scenes, because the police by that point were already surveilling him, they actually broke into his house, saved his life, and then arrested him. He eventually admitted to the murder and said that him and Lynette had got in an argument over £30, and instead of paying her, he killed her. He did finally plead guilty and was given life in prison.
She took her obsession with true crime way too far, murdering an innocent person because she wanted to know what it felt like. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the case of Jung Yoo Jung. Today's case takes place in Busan, South Korea, where Jung Yoo Jung lived with her grandfather. Born in 1999, she was abandoned by both of her parents at a very young age, which is why she ended up being raised by her granddad. She would attend an all-girls private school where the other students would describe her as weird. She wouldn't interact with any of the other girls, and if one of the girls did go up to Jung and approached her trying to speak to her, she would just glare at them. Because of this, she had no friends and was very much a loner. After leaving school for the next couple of years, Jung would vigorously study for an exam so that she could get a job in the civil service sector. As part of the qualifications that she needed to get a job in this sector, Jung had to be able to fluently speak English, which was something that she couldn't do. She could speak English, but at only a very basic level, and definitely not to the level that was needed for her to get this job. So as you can imagine, this was devastating for Jung, who would spend years working towards it. Like so many other people, Jung had a fascination with true crime, just like you and me. However, she wasn't interested in the actual case, the detective work, the unraveling of the crime, or even the psychology behind it. Jung was interested in the killers and the killers alone, and she rooted for them and supported them. She would spend hours upon hours on end binge watching true crime documentaries. She read several true crime related books, taking everything in and developing a compulsion to kill. She had watched and read about the high and the thrill of the kill, and now she wanted to experience that for herself. For 3 months, Jung would meticulously plan how she was going to commit the perfect murder using her knowledge from true crime documentaries and true crime shows. She scoped out her victim online using a tutoring website where she would pose as a mother to a 15-16-year-old girl looking for someone to tutor her fake daughter in English. This wouldn't be something that would ring any alarm bells or raise any red flags. In South Korea, a lot of children go through tutoring, but Jung was looking for a very specific type of victim, someone that resembled herself almost in a way. She was looking for a girl around about the same age as her, which was 23. This girl had to be either single or living alone. She had to be either in university or university graduate, and the most important detail of all, this girl, this tutor, had to agree to tutor Jung's fake daughter at their own home. After speaking to around about 54 women, on the 24th of May 2023, Jung chose her victim. Because of the laws in South Korea, no information about victims of violent crime get released. This means that we don't know the name or the identity of the victim, so for the purpose of this video, I am going to refer to the victim as Jian. On the 26th of May, Jung would arrive at the home of Jian. After selecting Jian as her victim, Jung went out of her way to buy a full school uniform so that she could dress up as a 15-16-year-old girl to make her story and her lie more believable. Jung would walk inside, and after confirming that no one else was home, she would pounce on Jian, pulling out a knife, and began to sadistically and uncontrollably stab Jian over and over and over 100 times. She would continue to stab Jian even when it was clear that she was well past death. Jung would now change out of the now blood-soaked school uniform, and some sources even state that she pulled off the clothing that Jian was wearing and put them on herself. CCTV would capture her walking around at midnight with a spring in her step, taking herself to a shop where she bought bleach, zip ties, plastic bags and locks. She returned to her own home to collect a suitcase and wheeled this back to Jian's home. Once inside, she began the process of meticulously dismembering Jian, wrapping up her remains and stuffing as much as she could inside of the suitcase. At around about 3 a.m, Jung would flag down a taxi and ask the driver if he would take her to this sort of secluded wooded area that was just outside the city. It was around about 12 miles away. He did, and when he dropped her off, he jumped out of the car and went to the boot to help her pull out this very heavy suitcase when he noticed something had seeped from inside. It was thick, it was red, it was wet, and it resembled blood. After waving Jung off, the taxi driver raced back into his car and immediately contacted the police. Officers were quickly dispatched, and within minutes of their arrival to the area and their search, they would discover dismembered human remains, although there was no sign of Jung. She would be identified identified and arrested 3 days later. Despite aiming to commit the perfect crime, she left a lot of evidence behind, which led the investigators and the detectives straight to her. Initially, she denied committing the murder, and because she thought she had committed a perfect murder using her knowledge from true crime documentaries, she genuinely thought that she was going to get away with it. Both Jung's computer and her phone were taken away from her by police, and when they were searched, they would find that in the weeks leading up to the murder, she had Googled things such as how to murder someone and murder without a body. They also recovered messages between Jung and Jiang from that tutoring website, where Jung was pretending to be a mother and needed someone to tutor her daughter. Obviously, the police knew that Jung wasn't a mother. She had no daughter that needed tutoring. So really, she had no reason to be contacting Jian. CCTV caught her going between both of the homes, going into the shop to buy the cleanup kit and pulling the suitcase from her home to Jian's. And probably most importantly, DNA that was extracted from inside Jian's home matched that of Jung Yoo-jung. Jung's family would plead with her, would beg her to just come clean and just tell the truth, and so eventually she did, confessing to the entire thing. When the investigators asked her why would she want to senselessly and horrifically murder an innocent stranger, Jung chillingly told them that she did it because she wanted to know what it felt like. Many people theorized that Jung had selected Jian as a victim because she felt some jealousy towards her. Jian was obviously so good at English that she was able to tutor other people, whereas Jung couldn't speak English very well, and that restricted her from getting a job in the civil service unit. She would go on to be sentenced to life in prison.
On March 8th, 2014, Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 with 239 people on board disappeared from the radar. There are 1.5 million theories and what ifs when it comes to what happened here, but the thing is that one of those crazy theories could be right. One of those crazy theories probably is right. The date is March 7th, 2014, around 11 p.m. Passengers are arriving at the Kuala Lumpur airport to take a red-eye to Beijing. Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 was going to take off around midnight, carrying 239 people on board, and it was going to fly through the night. It should have been a routine flight of about 5.5 to 6 hours. And that airplane itself had a pretty solid safety record. It had logged thousands of flights, and it was built to carry 282 passengers at full capacity, so more than they had on that night. 2 weeks before the incident, a full aircraft maintenance check was done, and all looked good. The night of the flight, it also went through its routine maintenance checks to prep. The pilot flying the plane was one of Malaysia's airline's most experienced pilots, having 33 years of service, and sitting beside him was a young pilot, 27 years old, with a promising career ahead of him. The cabin crew of 10 members was supervised by Patrick Gomes, who had worked for the Malaysia Airlines for 35 years. And then you had the 227 passengers from 15 different nations, from China, Malaysia, Indonesia, Australia, India, United States, France, Canada, so many different places. At 12:41 a.m. on March 8th, the plane drove off from the gate and lifted into the night sky. The flight plan again was pretty straightforward. They would be flying over the South China Sea, across Vietnam and into Chinese airspace, and scheduled to land at 6:30 in the morning Beijing time. Weather conditions were normal as the plane flew to an altitude of 35,000 feet, and everything was normal for about 30 minutes. So you guys know air traffic controllers. They're the people who sit in the towers and or control rooms and use radar to guide planes safely through the sky, telling pilots when to take off, when to land, and when to change altitudes to avoid collisions. And they cover specific areas on a map. So around 1:07 a.m., the flight was about to leave Malaysian airspace, so they were transferring to a different set of air traffic controllers. At 1:19 a.m., the pilot gets on the radio as they're exiting Malaysian airspace, and in the most normal, calm, routine voice says, "Good night, Malaysian 370. That would be the last communication anyone would hear from Flight 370. The plane was supposed to check in with a new set of air traffic controllers within minutes. That call never came. 2 minutes after, at 1:21 in the morning, the plane's transponder, which is what shows up on an air traffic control radar, stopped broadcasting, meaning that Flight 370 disappeared from the radar screens. And the air traffic control teams are like, "Can you see them? We can't see them. No, we can't see them on our map. Can you see them? No, we can't either." The transponder disappearing would have been a result of either it malfunctioning on the plane for whatever reason, or someone manually turning it off. Nobody could see the plane's location, nor could they make contact with the plane. 6:30 a.m. comes around. The plane should have landed. It hadn't landed. So the flight was now officially considered missing, which is incredibly concerning, but not as bad as it could have been yet, because the plane itself had enough fuel to last it until around 8:30 a.m. Crisis management teams were notified. Search and rescue add-on C was sent out, and that was the beginning of a mystery and the most expensive search effort in aviation history. Meanwhile, you have people online and on the media trying to figure out what has happened. Families have no clue where their loved ones are. Nobody knew a thing. And then 8:30 a.m. came and went, and the plane was still nowhere to be found. But then we learned that the flight disappeared from civilian radar screens, not from the military radar in the region. Malaysian military radar detected an unidentified aircraft, which was assumed to be Flight 370, making a sharp turn back toward the way that they came from. So right after the pilot gave that last call, the radar showed that the plane turned back over the South China Sea, crossed the Malay Peninsula, changed altitude, descending to approximately 12,000 feet at one point, headed toward the Strait of Malacca, flew along the border between Thai and Malaysian airspace, which would have seemingly followed a path designed to avoid radar detection, and then it was detected crossing into the Andaman Sea. Whatever happened on that plane signaled that someone with knowledge of aviation, flight paths, and planes had deliberately turned the plane around, switched off its communication systems, and flown it along a path that suggested an attempt to avoid detection. Now, we talked about the transponder. Well, apart from that, there is also an aircraft satellite data unit, SDU. An SDU is a piece of equipment on a plane that connects to communication satellites, allowing the aircraft to send and receive messages when they're flying over oceans or remote areas where there are no ground-based radio towers. So even with the transponder off, flight MH370 continued to leave a very small electronic trail, and that showed that the plane's SDU had lost power sometime between 1:07 and 2:03 in the morning. Then at 2:25 a.m., 3 minutes after they had flown beyond the range of military radar, the SDU logged back on, and for the next 6 hours, it kept pinging on different satellites. But it wasn't sending any messages. Kind of think of it like a cell phone. It wasn't sending text messages, but it would be the equivalent of, like, say, a phone looking for signal. So each pin contained critical data, and the last one was sent out at 8:19 in the morning, nearly 7 hours after the last voice contact, and almost an hour after Malaysian Airlines had publicly announced that the plane was missing. The last ping showed that the plane had flown into the southern Indian Ocean, approximately 1,100 miles away from Perth, Western Australia. Because of that, Australia then assumed their responsibility for the search. Analysis suggested that the plane had run out of fuel and had very likely crashed somewhere in the area. On March 24th, 2014, the Malaysian Prime Minister held a press conference and announced, quote, Flight MH370 ended in the southern Indian Ocean. He also said that the mission had changed from a search and rescue to more of a search and recovery. All 239 people on board were presumed gone. For days, ships and aircrafts from Malaysia, Vietnam, China, and other nations searched the wrong area of the Indian Ocean. They were searching deep in the ocean using things such as scanners, echo sounders, and video cameras, and they would search up to 46,000 miles of seafloor in waters up to 2.5 miles deep. They searched through one of the most remote parts of the planet while being exposed to brutal weather conditions. But signs of the actual wreckage site would be found 16 months later, thousands of miles away. On July 29th of 2015, a cleanup crew found a flaperon that had washed up on an island, a French territory in the Indian Ocean east of Madagascar. A flaperon is a 6-foot-long piece of the airplane's wing that helps control the plane during takeoff and landing. It was later confirmed through serial numbers to be that of MH370's right wing, making it the first physical proof that the plane had crashed in the Indian Ocean. By October of 2017, around 40 pieces total had been recovered, with at least 18 of them identified as, quote, very likely or almost certain to be from MH370. But all the parts found had been wing parts, panels, and fragments. No major wreckage like the engines have ever been found, which is why the main crash site remains uncertain. And without any of those big parts, it's pretty much impossible to figure out why the plane crashed. After searching 12,000 square kilometers of ocean floor without finding any wreckage, the governments of Malaysia, Australia, and China suspended the search. The operation had cost the US $155 million. Australia, Malaysia, and China all paid a certain percentage of that. Point being, it was the most expensive search in aviation history, and it found nothing. I was debating on whether I should include theories on this case or not, but I kind of want to leave the conversation up to you guys because I know so many of you guys have so much to say about this case. So I'm going to leave it there. I kind of want this comment section on this video to be like a discussion board because I genuinely am so curious to see what your opinions are on this. So that's it for me. I will see you in the comments. Hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the foreheads, every single one of you. 3 kisses, I'm feeling crazy.
Do you notice anything strange about this photo? It was late summer 2023 and Connor and Betty Bowman were living in Minnesota. On the outside looking in, they had the perfect life. They were both in their early 30s, they had well-paid jobs, and they had a really cute dog. What more could you want? Betty worked as a pharmacist and so was obviously super intelligent, but she was also really full of life, super vibrant and outgoing. And Connor had a very similar job actually. He specialized in poison science. Again, very intelligent and knew his stuff. The pair had been married since 2021 and they were actually a little unconventional in their relationship, no judgment, but they were like, we want to be committed to each other here, but we also want to kind of explore other things on the side. So they had this kind of open relationship situation. And I don't know what you guys think, but I do think it definitely takes a certain type of personality to be in a relationship like this. You certainly need to both have really good communication and make sure you're on the same page. Now that month, suddenly and very unexpectedly, Betty started getting really horrible symptoms. She was feeling sick, feeling faint, rushing to the toilet every 5 minutes. So she got taken into hospital. She was just really, really unwell. And the doctors had never seen anything like it. They couldn't put their finger on why she'd just suddenly, out of the blue, gone really downhill. Something was wrong with her heart. She had fluid buildup in her lungs. She even had to have part of her colon removed. And horrifically, 4 days later, she was dead. Medics were like, we've only seen cases this bad where someone's been poisoned. Her friends were understandably absolutely devastated, but they were like, we actually need to speak to police because we've got some information. Betty had told them that the night before her husband had given her a smoothie and it was so gross, it tasted so horrible that she was sick. And that was a little bit weird because Connor, the husband, never mentioned that to anybody in the hospital or the police when they were questioning him. He actually was going around telling people that she had a rare autoimmune disease and that's what killed her. Everyone else was like, sorry, what autoimmune disease? Connor was also acting super weird. He seemed to want to get everything done in a hurry. He was like, don't bother with an autopsy. We just want to get her cremated. I don't want her to be kind of sat round as like a body. And get this, just days before she'd even died, he was Google searching the term widow, asking if it was gender neutral. The word started to spread about Connor and how this open relationship actually might have started to cause issues within the relationship. Betty apparently found out that Connor was not only seeing another girl, but had also got feelings for this woman. She was like, that goes against the rules that we set about this open relationship. We were very clear. We are married to each other. We're committed to each other. Yes, we can have little things on the side, but there's no feelings involved. It seemed though Connor had disregarded this and totally got invested in another person. And the widow thing wasn't the only wild Google search that he made around the time of his wife's death. Before she even went into hospital, he'd Googled her weight and researched what the exact dosage of a gout medicine would be to be fatal. And guess what she was found to have in her system? Now, he also asked Google whether Google searches could be used against you in court. I hate to break it to you, Connor, they can. And a friend of Connor's actually even came forward to police to be like, I know I'm this guy's friend and I kind of shouldn't really be telling you this, but something doesn't sit right with me. Actually told me that he was going to get $500,000 after his wife died because of a life insurance payout. So everything was stacking up against Connor, obviously, and he was arrested 2 months after his wife's death. He's currently awaiting trial for murder, but I'm interested, what do you guys think? Is there a potential innocent explanation for all of this? To me, it just freaks me out that I definitely wouldn't be able to tell by this photo that there was anything wrong with this couple, and it just goes to show you don't know what's going on behind the scenes.
Could you imagine being 53 years old and getting a Facebook message that you're someone's kidnapped relative? This little baby girl was found alive 51 years after being kidnapped. Alta and Jeffrey Highsmith married very young and within a year were welcoming a little baby girl named Melissa. Sadly, the joy of welcoming a little baby did not last very long. Alta really struggled with being a new young mom, and her and Jeffrey were fighting constantly. Jeffrey admits that at this time he wasn't being a good father or husband. He was young and selfish, and this led to him and Alta splitting up. Alta and little baby Melissa moved in with a roommate, and at this time were receiving no financial help from Jeffrey. Alta was struggling. Now she's a young single mom with no money. She needed to find a job and she needed to find one fast. And she ended up finding a decent job, but they did not offer daycare for baby Melissa. So Alta took an ad out in the newspaper saying that she was looking for a babysitter, and really quickly she got a response from a woman who was interested in babysitting little baby Melissa.
This was 1971. You couldn't just look someone up on Facebook or Instagram to see if they were a weirdo. But Alta did ask this woman if she could meet up the following day, so she could just meet her, ask her some questions, but that woman never showed up. That woman did end up calling Melissa a couple hours later, apologizing that she didn't show up, and said she was still interested in babysitting Melissa if Alta was okay with it. And at this point, Alta was desperate and out of options. She had to start this job the following day or she was going to be fired. She needed that job so she could support herself and her baby. So against her better judgment, she agreed to hand over her baby to someone she never met. The next day, Alta left to start her new job, and she asked if her roommate could hand over baby Melissa to the babysitter when she got there. Shortly later, someone did come to the door and introduce themselves as Ruth Johnson, Melissa's babysitter. That person was in the home for only a few minutes before they left with little 22-month-old Melissa. Something really interesting about this Ruth Johnson person is that Alta's roommate said that this person could have been a man impersonating a woman. That babysitter was meant to drop little Melissa back off later that evening, but they never did. Little 22-month-old Melissa Highsmith had just been kidnapped. Alta obviously blamed herself, but so did Melissa's father, Jeffrey, because he wasn't financially supporting them. The grief of losing their baby kind of pushed the two of them back together. They ended up remarrying and having 4 more children, but they never got over losing Melissa. And it was always this super weird thing for their new 4 children, knowing that they had an older sister that was kidnapped, that they never got to meet. And as social media and the internet became a thing, it was actually Melissa's siblings that were posting and pushing to keep her story alive. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children actually made an age progression photo.
The internet is scary for so many reasons, we know that, and in this case, it's a story about a college student being abducted by her sugar daddy. I hate to say it, but the ending of the story is worse than anyone could have ever imagined. Mackenzie Lewick was born March 8th of 1996, and she was raised in a city called El Segundo, a city right outside of Los Angeles, California. She grew up with her 3 brothers and what her family described to be a close-knit, loving home. As a high school student, she was friendly, she was outgoing, she was athletic, she swam competitively, and she also played water polo. After graduating, Mackenzie enrolled at the University of Utah, where she was planning on majoring in kinesiology and pre-nursing. At the time of this story, she was a senior in college and planning a career in health sciences. She had also mentioned the possibility of continuing her education by going to either nursing school or medical school. Mackenzie was also a member of the A Chi O sorority, and she was working in a Salt Lake City biological testing lab. Her friends described her to be bubbly, nurturing, kind-hearted, quote, a ball of light. So all of that gives you an idea of what kind of person Mackenzie was. However, important to note, there was a side of Mackenzie's life that her family members did not know about. And that was that Mackenzie was what some people refer to as a sugar baby. Months prior to her life being ripped away from her way too soon, she had been offering advice to other girls on social media who had also expressed interest in finding sugar daddies. And at one point, she also left a public comment with advice and a sentence about how she currently had 2 arrangements, aka 2 sugar daddies at that time. This hidden part of her life would unfortunately connect her with a man who had nothing but ill intentions. The weekend of June 15th, 2019 was a weekend that everything changed. Mackenzie had flown home to California for her grandmother's funeral to spend time with her family and also to attend the funeral. It was held at the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that weekend, and Mackenzie's last ever post on social media before she disappeared was a touching tribute to her grandma, along with photos of her grandma, her grandpa, and her mother. It was obviously a very sad, hard, emotional weekend, but eventually Mackenzie did have to go back to Salt Lake City. She had exams to take, she had classes to attend to, she had to get caught up on everything that she had missed, given that she was getting closer and closer to graduation. She landed back at Salt Lake City International Airport from California on June 17th, and as soon as she landed, as was routine for her, she texted her parents to let them know that she had landed safely, and her parents did not know it yet, but that would be the last time they would ever hear from Mackenzie again. She landed just after 1 in the morning, and she called a Lyft to the airport, but Mackenzie Mackenzie did not go home. Instead, she gave the driver an address that didn't make sense to anyone who knew her. The address was to Hatch Park in North Salt Lake, about 8 miles away from her apartment. Around 3 a.m, the driver later told police that Mackenzie met up with someone at the park that he dropped her off at. He said that she didn't seem to be uncomfortable or in any sort of distress at all. According to court documents, the Lyft driver said that she was met by someone who then helped her put her luggage inside of a vehicle. And again, she appeared completely normal, completely chilled out, not concerned at all to see the person that was waiting for her. I think also she told the Lyft driver not to worry about anything because obviously it was the middle of the night. I think she told him, listen, I know that this is weird that you're dropping me off at a park in the middle of the night, but don't worry, I'm meeting up with a friend. By all accounts, it sounded like Mackenzie went willingly to meet up with this person. And who was this person? His name was Ayula Ajayi. 31-year-old Ayula was a man that Mackenzie had been talking to the last several months on a website. I think website, maybe app, or both, whatever. She had been talking to him for the last several months back and forth. And what we know about Ayula is that he was an IT worker who had worked for pretty high-profile companies. He was originally from Nigeria, but was in the States to work. He had briefly been in the Army National Guard, and he studied computer science at Utah State University, but never graduated. If you looked at this guy in a very surface-level way, he seemed normal enough, but that wasn't necessarily the case because there were bright neon red flags about who this guy really was, and let's talk through some of those things. In 2012, he had been banned from campus for several reasons, including problems with his visa and allegations that he had stolen somebody's iPad. In 2014, he had been investigated in connection with an SA case. However, not much progressed in regards to that because that victim ultimately decided not to press charges. In 2018, he met a woman through a dating app and invited her back to his place, where he then SA'd her. Apparently, the woman had come over, and when they were watching TV, Ayula completely threw himself onto her, even after it was clear that she didn't want absolutely anything to do with him. When she tried to get away, he pinned her down and bit her at least 3 times, causing, quote, significant pain and leaving behind bruising and bite marks. But that's not all, because Ayula has also been accused by his ex-wife, who has claimed that she was really scared of him throughout their marriage because of certain comments that he made to her that really made her fear for her life. His ex-wife was so scared that he would actually go through and hurt her or do something worse that she ended up completely cutting communication with him. That same ex-wife also reported that he had tendencies of getting, quote, real aggressive when she didn't do what he demanded. Another very sus thing from Ayula is that in the months leading up to meeting up with Mackenzie, he had met with a contractor to talk about building out a hidden room underneath his front porch. He wanted this to be about the size of a walk-in closet with thumbprint locks, only he could access it, and he also wanted large hooks placed in the wall about head height, specifically hooks anchored into concrete walls. The contractor has said, quote, he was adamant about getting it done really fast and money was no object. Thankfully, the contractor was so uncomfortable and so put off by all of his weird requests that he ultimately decided to turn down the project. So, this was the man that 23-year-old Mackenzie Lewick was meeting up with in the middle of the night at that park. Now, as far as how they met/began talking, that was back in 2018 through a dating website called Seeking Arrangements. Seeking Arrangements is a platform for quote-unquote sugar daddies to meet quote-unquote sugar babies. So the two of them had been in contact for a while. Some reports even say that they had been texting for over a year. And the night that they were finally set to meet in person was that night in June at the park. But what Mackenzie did not know, what she could not have known, was that this wasn't a date, it was a trap. Her last text message to Ayula was at 2:58 in the morning. Her phone would be turned off at 2:59 in the morning and it would never be turned back on again. In the early hours of June 17th, Mackenzie was dropped off at Hatch Park where the two of them met up. Afterwards, he drove her back to his house at a neighborhood called Fair Park. There, he tied her hands behind her back with zip ties and rope. Moments later, he tried using his hands but couldn't because I assumed that Mackenzie was putting up a fight, understanding what was happening to her. So Ayula grabbed a belt and used that on Mackenzie until she eventually stopped moving. Mackenzie Lewick lost her life sometime in the early hours of the morning, June 17th of 2019. She had just turned 23 years old 3 months earlier. The following day, Ayula now had a new problem to deal with. There was a deceased body inside of his house and he needed to get rid of it immediately. And how exactly was he planning on doing so? Well, he was going to burn it. Ayula drove himself over to a grocery store where he purchased a gas can and filled it up with gasoline. When he returned home, he took that along with the body to his backyard. I honestly don't know what time of day it was when he was doing all of this, but I really don't think that it was, say, in the middle of the night. I don't know how nobody saw what he was doing. Maybe it was covered up by a fence. I don't know. But the reason why I say I don't think that it was in the middle of the night was because his neighbors started complaining about a horrible smell. And apparently, at least one of those neighbors told him to stop doing whatever he was doing because it smelled really, really bad. Obviously, they had no idea, no way of knowing that what they were smelling was the literal destruction of a human body. Back at Mackenzie's school, her friends knew that Mackenzie had been out of town, obviously, for her grandma's funeral, but then a couple of days passed when Mackenzie should have been back, yet no one could get a hold of her. As far as her parents, they knew that she had landed back safely in Utah because she had texted them to tell them so, but after a couple of days of their messages going unanswered, they quickly too began to really worry. They didn't worry immediately because she was in college. They had just seen her. Mackenzie was really, really close to her family, but it wasn't a super alarming thing if they went a few days without talking to each other. But by June 20th, the concern had really grown. At first, her dad wanted to believe that maybe she had lost her phone and maybe that was the reason as to why she was not answering, but she did have a laptop. She also would have been able to use a friend's phone or done something to let her parents know that she was okay, but she hadn't. So by June 20th, 3 days after she had landed back in Utah, Mackenzie's father called authorities to fill him in and tell them that he needed help in finding his daughter. And his voice on the call breaks my heart because you can tell that he's trying to stay calm and collected, trying not to assume the worst, but the concern in his voice is so noticeable and it's heartbreaking to listen to. She was reported missing at 4 p.m. on June 20th, and while authorities were doing their thing, starting to look through Mackenzie's electronic devices, getting CCTV footage from the airport, getting hold of her Lyft driver, her family and friends turned to social media to post about her disappearance and ask the public for help. After talking to the Lyft driver, it didn't take long for authorities to identify Ayula. But shockingly enough, on June 24th, Ayula voluntarily walked into the Salt Lake City Police Department on his own. This was a week after Mackenzie had been reported missing, and his demeanor when he showed up to the station was very much, I don't know anything, I've never met her in person, but I'm here to cooperate and help you because I want to help you find her. He was full on putting up an act, trying to play the good guy. He did admit to have texted Mackenzie before, but he was sticking to his story that he had never met her in person. Quote, "Yeah, we never met before, so that would be weird to meet at that time of night. That's not safe for her or safe for me," end quote. But police officers knew that he was lying. And they had a very, very strong feeling that Ayula knew way more than he was letting on. And that feeling was only confirmed after phone records showed that both Mackenzie and Ayula's location had both been at Hatch Park within less than a minute apart from each other the night of her disappearance. On June 26th, authorities got a search warrant to search through Ayula's house. During that search warrant, they brought with them a cadaver dog. And what do you know? Almost immediately, the dog alerted to the smell of a human body in the backyard. And the closer that investigators looked in that area, the area that the dog was alerting to, the worse things were looking for Ayula. And their biggest nightmare was about to be proven true. Police found a human bone, charred muscular tissue, part of a scalp with blonde hair that was confirmed to be Mackenzie's, a cell phone, and other charred personal items in Ayula's backyard. That was obviously more than enough to arrest him. Ayula Ajayi was arrested and charged with kidnapping, obstructing justice, and of a human body on June 28th. After his arrest, it took him a little bit, but he eventually did tell his attorneys where the rest of Mackenzie was buried. And on July 3rd, authorities found her. Her remains had been buried beneath some trees just off a main road in a shallow grave with her arms still bound behind her back with those zip ties and rope. An autopsy later revealed significant signs of blunt force trauma, leaving a 5-centimeter hole in her skull with part of her scalp missing. She was in an area that was around 85 miles away from Ayula's house and nearly 100 miles north of Salt Lake City. On October 7th of 2020, to avoid facing trial, Ayula pled guilty on all charges. And it was at his sentencing that Mackenzie's family finally got a chance to speak. Her mother, Diana, said, quote, "This sentence today will not bring back Mackenzie, but I hope it will keep this defendant out of the public eye and unable to commit these heinous crimes again," end quote. And in his victim impact statement, her father, Gregory, stated, quote, "My daughter, Mackenzie Lueck, was a sweet, amazing young lady with the world ahead of her. She was a kind-hearted person that cared about others. Now I will not have the opportunity to see her blossom in life," end quote. Ayula was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He also got an additional 1 to 15 years and an additional up to 5 years. All sentenced to be run consecutively, meaning back to back. So there he is now, 36 years old, serving his sentence, and he will never be released from prison. Thank God. Yeah, everything about this is so terrible. That is all from me today. Thank you for spending time with me today and for listening to Mackenzie's story. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
Did Scott Peterson kill his pregnant wife, Lacey Peterson? This is a very well-known case. It's very controversial as well. There's a lot of people that think Scott Peterson is innocent or Scott Peterson is guilty. It's been getting a lot of attention again because Netflix just put out a new docuseries. Peacock has a documentary coming out tomorrow, I'm pretty sure. You guys have been asking me nonstop for my thoughts lately, so we are jumping right in. Scott and Lacey Peterson were really like that couple. I know you know the type. They're the perfect couple. Scott was a handsome all-American golden boy. Lacey was an absolutely gorgeous cheerleader in high school with like the most beautiful smile ever. Like immediately after meeting Scott, Lacey told her mom that she met the man that she was going to marry. The entire thing seemed like a fairy tale. After Lacey and Scott got married, they tried to have a baby for like 3 years with no luck. They were considering fertility treatments or adoption, but in 2002, they finally conceived. And by December, Lacey Peterson was 8 months pregnant with their son Connor when she mysteriously disappeared on Christmas Eve. Scott's story was early that morning on Christmas Eve, him and his wife Lacey sat down to watch a little bit of her favorite TV show, Martha Stewart. Lacey had plans to go shopping that day, to do some cleaning, to bake cookies, and take their dog for a walk. And Scott says early that morning he left to go golfing alone. And I know we're all thinking it, leaving your very pregnant wife on Christmas Eve to go golfing alone is a little strange, but let's keep going. So Scott told his wife that he was going golfing that day, but after he left, he decided it was a little too cold to go golfing, so he decided to take his brand new boat out fishing, again, alone. A few of their neighbors claim that they saw Lacey walking their dog that morning. That fits with Scott's story. But then around 10 a.m., a neighbor just sees their dog walking around alone, but he still has his leash on. I guess she did not think that was weird at all because she just put the dog back in Lacey and Scott's backyard. When Scott got home from fishing, he found the dog in the backyard with its leash still on. Lacey's car was at the house. All of her belongings were at the house, but Lacey was not at the house. So Scott called Lacey's mom to see if Lacey was there. When she wasn't there, Scott told Lacey's mom that, his wife and her daughter are missing. So Lacey Peterson was reported missing. There were no signs that a crime had been committed in their home. There was no evidence. There's no signs of a struggle. But Scott was really rubbing people the wrong way. He was acting really, really weird. He seemed to have no emotion or care at all about his very pregnant wife. But Lacey's family were still in support of Scott at this time, but the media and public were not. Lacey's disappearance was making headlines nationally. Everyone knew about this case. Everyone wanted to get Scott in front of the cameras, but Scott did not want to be in front of any cameras because he was hiding a very big secret. Scott had been cheating on Lacey. Scott was having an affair with a woman named Amber Fry, and that woman, Amber Fry, had no idea her boyfriend had a wife until her boyfriend's wife was reported missing. Put yourself into Amber's shoes for 1 second, okay? You're watching TV and you see on the TV that a pregnant woman has gone missing and her husband is being considered as a suspect, and that man is your boyfriend. I mean, it's absolutely insane, but Amber did the right thing. She immediately calls the police, and Amber had a lot to say. Turns out 5 weeks before Lacey disappeared, Scott told Amber that he had been previously married, but he had recently lost his wife, and this would be his first holiday without his wife. I mean, this man is either extremely guilty or a psychic, right? The exact same day that Scott told Amber that his wife was dead, Scott bought that brand new boat, like he had been maybe planning something. So Amber allowed the police to secretly record her and Scott's phone calls, and then she just played along with Scott like nothing was wrong. So 8 days after Lacey disappeared, they held a candlelight vigil for her and her baby, Connor. And guess what Scott was doing during that candlelight vigil? In the middle of the vigil for his missing pregnant wife, Scott is calling his mistress Amber in the middle of the vigil, talking about how excited he is for their future together. And on what would have been Connor's due date, they had another candlelight vigil for him, and Scott didn't show up. Guess where he was? He was out buying a birthday present for Amber because the same day was her birthday and he was trying to see his mistress. And when Scott's affair with Amber got leaked to the public, they were even more against Scott, and even Lacey's family turned against Scott at this point. There were no signs of Lacey or Connor for months. They did so many searches until April 13th. Tragically, the remains of a little baby boy that were Connor washed up on the shore of the San Francisco Bay, and the very next next day, parts of Laci Peterson's remains washed up on shore as well. And this was the exact same area that Scott says he took out his boat fishing the day that Laci disappeared. And only 4 days later, Scott was arrested for the murder of his wife and unborn child. And guess where Scott was when he got arrested? Only 4 days later, after his wife and his son's bodies were found, Scott was at the golf course. A golf course in San Diego near the Mexico border. And when Scott was arrested, he had a bunch of camping equipment in his car. He also had $15,000 cash in his car, as well as 4 cell phones and his brother's ID. He also had grown out facial hair, which he previously did not have. He had also bleached his hair. He was looking pretty much unrecognizable, and a lot of people think that when he was arrested, he was actually planning on crossing the Mexico border and fleeing the country. And Scott Peterson was found guilty for the deaths of Laci and Connor, and he was sentenced to death row with no physical evidence that actually linked him to the crime. I mean, there was no blood in the house, there was no blood on his boat. They really only had circumstantial evidence that convicted him, which is why this case is so controversial and still debated to this day over 20 years later. And if I tried to tell you every single piece of evidence that makes Scott look guilty or everything that could suggest that maybe he's innocent, we would really be here talking all day long. What we do know is that Scott told his mistress that his wife was dead 5 weeks before she died. And that exact same day, he bought a brand new boat that he did not tell anyone he bought, which a lot of people think he used to get rid of Laci's body. And the same area that he says he was the day that she disappeared was where her and her unborn baby's body were later found. And right before Laci disappeared, Scott made 5 homemade anchors for his boat with concrete. And after Laci disappeared, 4 were missing. A lot of people think that he used those anchors to try and hold Laci's body down, and he was never expecting her to be found. There are a very, very small amount of details that could suggest that maybe Scott is innocent, but none of them outweigh the things from me that show that he is guilty. In 2020, so just a few years ago, Scott Peterson's sentence was changed from death row to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and to this day, he maintains his innocence. And in 2022, the Innocence Project of LA took on Scott's case because they believe that he is innocent and that they have evidence that could prove that he is innocent and was wrongly convicted. Innocence Project of LA want to test new evidence. They also want to get Scott Peterson a new trial. Potentially he might. I'm pretty sure the documentary that's coming out tomorrow on Peacock is a lot about this Innocence Project of LA taking on Scott's trial. So if you're interested on that, you can check that out. You can also follow me along because I'm always posting different updates on my stories, so you can follow me if you want updates. And speaking of following me, oh my god, I bet a lot of you guys already know what I'm about to say because a lot of you guys have already messaged me, but today I hit 1 million followers here on TikTok, which is absolutely insane. Thank you guys so much. I never thought this would happen. You guys are the coolest community I could ever ask for. You guys care about victims and their stories and justice just as much as I do. You guys have given me this platform where I'm able to share victim stories and get cases out there that need attention, and I never thought that this would ever happen, and you guys have really changed my life, so thank you so much. The fact that I get to talk about cases that I care a lot about and mean a lot to me, like this one. I care so much about Laci Peterson's case. She was a woman about my age. She was only a couple months older than me. She just wanted to be a mom and bring her baby Connor into this world, and the leading cause of death of pregnant women in the United States is homicide, which I don't think a lot of people know about. So the fact that I'm able to bring attention to these cases and things that matter to me is absolutely insane. You guys have really changed my life, and I want to thank you guys somehow. Think about maybe doing a giveaway. I have some things I think you guys might like. So if you know what maybe I should do to say thank you, let me know in the comments. While you're there, discuss this case with me. We can debate, but please be respectful to each other. And while you're there, please let me know what case you want me to cover next. I love you guys so much. You have no idea, and I'll see you tomorrow.